Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping straight into a really specific, highly charged piece of media. We're going to objectively break down how Sky News Australia constructed their commentary around the 2026 Albanese government budget. Now, the source material here is fierce, it's highly critical, and it paints a very deliberate picture of the current political landscape. But regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum, understanding exactly how these arguments are built is just incredibly valuable. So we're going to strip away the noise and look directly at the mechanics of these claims.
Here's our roadmap for The Explainer. We're looking at 5 key themes from the broadcast: Labor's budget under fire, polling the public reaction, the testamentary trust debate, the opposition's counterpitch, and finally, the immigration and welfare divide.
All right, starting right off with Section 1, Labor's budget under fire.
The entire foundation of the broadcast critique is built on this idea of a trust deficit. To prove this, the commentator zeroes in on a really tense media exchange. A journalist repeatedly presses the Prime Minister, asking him to absolutely guarantee there will be no changes to negative gearing and capital gains tax. The Prime Minister says they have no plans to change it, but when pressed, he refuses to definitively rule out future changes. The broadcast seizes on this specific interaction, framing that refusal as undeniable evidence of a broken promise and a fundamental breach of trust.
From there, the commentary pivots straight from this alleged broken trust to the immediate, day-to-day financial reality of the viewers. The commentator argues that politicians are just completely insulated from everyday cost of living pressures. They don't personally pay for their travel, their petrol, or their phone bills. And because of that massive disconnect, the broadcast asserts that everyday voters are going to relentlessly scrutinize every single detail of this budget, literally down to the last dollar, to see exactly how it hits their family's back pocket.
Moving right along to Section 2, polling the public reaction.
The broadcast then tries to back up its claims using some hard numbers, pulling from news poll data regarding Labor's housing policies. They argue the public is flat out rejecting the government's claim that changes to property taxes will actually increase housing supply. Looking at the numbers they highlight, 22% of people believe the changes won't make a difference at all, and 38% believe they're a step in the wrong direction.
But it's really about how the broadcast uses those numbers. By combining that 22% and 38%, the commentator emphatically states that a massive 60% of voters are just totally unimpressed with the Prime Minister's housing policies. They use this aggregated 60% figure to paint a picture of a government that is completely out of step with the electorate on the absolute key issue of property.
And then they take the public mood argument even further with this striking number, 50%. The broadcast cites that fully half the public believes this budget is explicitly driving a wedge between younger and older generations. The commentator doesn't mince words here at all. They use this exact statistic to accuse the government of deliberately engineering a class war through its fiscal policy.
Which brings us to Section 3, the Testamentary Trust Debate.
Now, things get a bit into the weeds here with a highly specific policy shift, but the broadcast provocatively brands it a stealth death tax. The segment points out that under previous Labor leadership, proposed tax changes exempted trusts related to wills and estates. But under the current government, they highlight a split. Fixed testamentary trusts are exempt from new minimum taxes, but discretionary testamentary trusts are not. The broadcast uses this specific difference to argue the government is quietly moving the goalposts on voters.
To make sure this policy critique actually lands emotionally, the broadcast provides a very specific definition. They argue these trusts are absolutely not just tax loopholes for the ultra-wealthy. Instead, they frame them as vital financial tools used by everyday vulnerable people. They specifically cite farmers, small businesses, and families managing care for disabled children. By defining it this way, the broadcast really turns up the heat on the perceived cruelty of the tax change.
When journalists push the treasurer on why this policy shifted from the previous exemptions, the broadcast plays his response. The treasurer basically says the government's job is to make the right decisions for 2026, not to relitigate 2018 or 2019. But the commentator immediately shuts this defense down, framing the response as evasive, waffle, and flat out calling him tricky for not giving a straight answer.
That takes us to Section 4, the opposition's counterpitch.
So after laying out this massive critique of the government, the broadcast dramatically pivots to the alternative, and they frame opposition leader Angus Taylor in a highly favorable light. They introduce him as a Rhodes Scholar with serious economic and business chops. According to the broadcast, Taylor has found his mojo and is running rings around what they call a financially incompetent government. He is held up as the ultimate champion of struggling small businesses, putting the policy backbone back into the Liberal Party.
To illustrate this supposed policy backbone, the segment contrasts how both parties approach income tax. They are super critical of Labor's approach, but they heavily spotlight Taylor's specific plan to index income tax thresholds. The commentator praises this strategy as the exact right way to fight bracket creep, arguing it properly incentivizes low to middle income earners so the tax system doesn't punish them just for trying to get ahead.
Finally, we hit Section 5, the immigration and welfare divide.
This is, without a doubt, the most intense theme of the entire broadcast. The commentator sets the stage with a really stark projection: 30 million. The broadcast asserts that Australia is on track to hit a population of 30 million people by 2030, which is just 4 years out from the budget's horizon. They use this massive figure as the direct context for the housing shortage, explicitly linking high immigration rates to domestic cost of living pain.
Unsurprisingly, this framing triggered a massive political reaction. The broadcast shows the Prime Minister directly condemning the opposition's approach, calling it un-Australian to divide people between migrants and non-migrants. He argues that migrants are hardworking Australians building the nation. The commentator, however, brushes the PM's reaction off entirely, calling it hysterical and claiming it misrepresents the opposition's actual policy.
Because as the broadcast clarifies, Angus Taylor's proposed split wasn't actually between migrants and non-migrants. It was specifically between Australian citizens and non-citizens. The segment breaks down Taylor's bold pitch. Under a coalition government, access to major welfare systems like the pension, the dole, the NDIS, and other welfare would be strictly locked down to Australian citizens only. The broadcast anchors this entire welfare policy in one core philosophy from Angus Taylor: if people coming to our country commit to this country, we will commit to them. The commentator praises this stance relentlessly. They argue it's just common sense that taxpayer money shouldn't go to those who haven't pledged loyalty to Australia, framing it as a highly potent political weapon against what they call Labor's socialist values. And that brings us to the ultimate conclusion of the source material. The broadcast clearly frames this budget as the absolute battleground for the next election. We've seen exactly how they structure this argument, starting from allegations of broken trust on property taxes, all the way to fiery cultural divides over citizenship and welfare. So, the big question we're left with, and the one the broadcast poses to its viewers, is this: will this fierce clash over taxes, welfare, and citizenship ultimately decide the fate of the Albanese government? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll see you next time.